I stood frozen as Patricia, the VP's wife, burst into my evening compliance training. "Your evening business program is unprofessional," she announced to the room of junior analysts. My face burned as I handed over my laptop, 6 years of dedicated work dismissed in seconds. The next morning, I cleared out my desk in shocked silence. At 9 a.m., as I carried my box past the conference room, I heard the SEC auditor ask, "Where's your registered chief compliance officer?" The CEO looked at the org chart. His hand trembled. "My name is Blaine Carter, 34 years old and, until yesterday, the chief compliance officer at Meridian Capital, a mid-sized investment firm based in Boston. For 6 years, I had dedicated myself to ensuring our firm operated within regulatory guidelines while still meeting ambitious growth targets. I joined Meridian fresh out of college with a finance degree, starting as an analyst when the company was just 20 employees strong. I worked my way up by spotting regulatory risks others missed and developing systems to protect both the firm and its clients. When the compliance manager left 3 years ago, I lobbied hard for the position despite being younger than most candidates. Will Grant, our CEO, took a chance on me, and I rewarded his faith by building a compliance program that sailed through our first 2 SEC audits. Will founded Meridian Capital after leaving a larger Wall Street firm, driven by a vision to create a more nimble investment company. Charming and visionary, he built the firm from nothing to managing over $2 billion in assets. He had always valued my caution, calling me his safety net at company meetings. Then there was Jack Pearson, our vice president of sales. Jack came from old money and old school Wall Street, where compliance was viewed as an annoying speed bump on the road to profits. Tall, imposing, and perpetually dressed in custom suits, Jack cultivated an aura of success that attracted wealthy clients. He and I had maintained a professional but tense relationship. My requirements for documentation and due diligence often conflicting with his desire to close deals quickly. Patricia Pearson, Jack's wife, was a former model 15 years his junior who had no financial background but wielded considerable social influence. Her connections to Boston's elite brought valuable clients to Meridian, and she never let anyone forget it. My closest ally at Meridian was Tessa Adams from Human Resources. We started at the company around the same time and bonded over being young women trying to establish professional credibility. Tessa often warned me about office politics. I was too focused on regulations to notice. Then there was Devin Walsh, a bright young analyst who reminded me of myself 5 years ago. He asked thoughtful questions about the why behind regulations, not just the rules themselves. 6 months ago, I completed my MBA with a focus on ethics in financial markets. My thesis examined how compliance failures led to the financial crisis and developed frameworks to prevent similar collapses. I was proud of balancing full-time work with evening classes for 2 years. Will had initially supported my education, even providing tuition assistance as a retention incentive. With Will's approval, I had started voluntary evening training sessions for junior staff 3 months ago. These workshops explain the regulations in practical terms, helping analysts understand why documentation matters and how to spot red flags. Attendance was optional but grew steadily as word spread that my training helped people avoid common pitfalls. What I didn't realize was how threatened Jack felt by these sessions. As I later discovered, he had been pressuring Will to scale back compliance efforts as the company prepared for expansion into new alternative investment products. My growing influence with the junior staff undermined his authority, and my freshly minted MBA credentials gave weight to my concerns about these new products. "She's becoming the moral authority around here," I overheard him tell Will one day as I passed his office. "That MBA has her thinking she runs the place." Just last week, I had flagged documentation issues with a new high-yield investment product Jack was aggressively marketing to clients. The projected returns seemed unrealistic given the underlying assets, and the risk disclosures were buried in technical language most clients wouldn't understand. I requested additional time to review the materials before they went to clients. Jack cornered me in the break room that afternoon. "Blaine, We need to talk about your priorities. This firm exists to make money for our clients, not to create paperwork. Will and I built this company while you were still in college. I understand that, Jack, but proper disclosure isn't just paperwork. It's protection for the clients and the firm. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Your job is to keep us out of trouble, not to stop progress. Maybe that academic bubble has you confused about how the real world works. I stood my ground. The real world includes SEC regulations that protect everyone. I'm just doing my job. We'll see about that, he said, walking away. I should have recognized the threat for what it was. Tuesday evening, 7 o'clock. I was 15 minutes into my compliance training session with 8 junior analysts. The topic: proper documentation of client risk tolerance assessments. Not exactly thrilling material, but essential to protecting vulnerable clients from unsuitable investments. The key is matching the investment to the client's actual financial situation, not just what they say they want, I explained, showing a slide with the relevant SEC rule. We've all had clients who say they understand the risks but clearly don't. Your notes from these conversations are your protection if questions arise later. The door swung open without a knock. Patricia Pearson stood there in a designer dress, clearly coming from some social event. Her expression shifted from surprise to disdain as she surveyed our conference room. What exactly is going on here? She asked, her voice cutting through the room. Evening compliance training, I answered, maintaining my professional tone despite the interruption. We're covering client suitability requirements. Patricia stepped fully into the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Your evening business program is unprofessional. This looks like you're running your own little university after hours. The junior analysts shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I could see their respect for me, battling with their instinct not to cross the VP's wife. These are voluntary sessions to help the team understand regulatory requirements, I explained calmly. Will approved them months ago. Did my husband approve them? Patricia asked, emphasizing her connection to Jack. The training program was discussed with leadership. Yes, I said carefully. Patricia walked to the front of the room where I stood. This needs to end now. You're keeping these people from their actual work and families with your little power trip. My face flushed hot with embarrassment and anger. 6 years of building professional credibility was being dismantled in seconds by someone with no financial expertise or company role. Jack appeared in the doorway, as if on cue. What's going on? He took in the scene quickly, his eyes narrowing at me. Your wife has concerns about the compliance training sessions, I said, struggling to maintain composure. I came to pick you up for dinner and found Blaine running some kind of after-hours school, Patricia explained to Jack. Jack surveyed the room, his expression darkening. Everyone back to your desks or head home. This session is over. The junior analysts gathered their materials quickly, avoiding eye contact with me as they filed out. Only Devin hesitated at the door, giving me a sympathetic glance. Once they left, Jack turned to me. Hand over the presentation materials and your laptop. We need to discuss this program with Will tomorrow. My laptop? Jack. That's company property with sensitive information. I can't just... Which is exactly why it shouldn't be used for unauthorized training programs, he interrupted. The laptop stays here tonight. Humiliated and angry, I disconnected my computer and handed it over. 6 years of work, my entire professional life, sitting in Jack's manicured hands. We'll sort this out in the morning, he said dismissively. I left the building in a daze, replaying the scene in my mind during the entire subway ride home. By the time I reached my apartment, a text from Will awaited me. My office, 8 a.m. tomorrow. That night, I barely slept, rehearsing my defense of the training program and my broader contributions to Meridian. I arrived at 7:30 a.m., hoping to speak with Will before Jack arrived, but his door remained closed until our scheduled meeting. At 8 sharp, Will's assistant ushered me in. Jack was already there, seated comfortably beside Will's desk rather than across from it like a normal employee. The power dynamic was immediately clear. "Blaine, take a seat," Will said, his usual warmth notably absent. "We need to discuss your role here at Meridian." For 20 painful minutes, Will explained how the company was going in a different direction with compliance. My approach was described as too academic and not aligned with our entrepreneurial culture. "Your MBA has given you valuable knowledge," Will said, "not meeting my eyes, but perhaps changed your perspective in ways that aren't compatible with our growth objectives." "Will, I've only ever tried to protect this firm," I argued. "Those training sessions help our team understand why compliance matters, not just what the rules are." "The decision has been made," Jack interjected. "We'll be restructuring the compliance function under the legal department going forward." The rest passed in a blur. Severance details. Non-disclosure agreements. Return of company property. I signed papers without fully reading them, still struggling to process what was happening. A security guard escorted me to my desk where Tessa waited, her eyes red. "I just heard," she whispered. "This is wrong, Blaine." I packed my family photos and the plant I'd kept alive for 4 years, leaving behind the policy manuals I'd painstakingly created. Colleagues watched in uncomfortable silence as I was escorted out like a criminal. As I carried my box toward the elevator, I passed the main conference room where an unfamiliar woman sat with a government ID badge visible on the table. I slowed, catching fragments of conversation through the partially open door. "As part of our routine examination, I'll need to speak with your chief compliance officer first," she said. "Absolutely," Will replied, his voice overly bright. "Let me just check on her availability." The woman consulted her notes. "That would be Blaine Carter, correct? According to your last filing, she's your registered chief compliance officer with the SEC." Will glanced down at what appeared to be an organizational chart on the table. His hand trembled visibly as he realized I was watching from the hallway. Our eyes met briefly before the security guard urged me toward the elevator. As the doors closed, I saw Will frantically whispering to his assistant. The subway ride home felt surreal. Rush hour crowds pushed around me while my mind replayed the humiliation of being escorted out. 6 years of building a career, gone in less than 24 hours. At home, I placed my box of belongings on the kitchen counter and collapsed onto my couch, still wearing my work clothes. My phone buzzed with a text from Tessa. "SEC auditor showed up right after you left. Surprise examination." Everyone's panicking. I stared at the message. My personal devastation momentarily overshadowed by professional concern. Surprise audits usually meant someone had tipped off the regulators about potential violations. Another text arrived from Devin. "This is crazy. They're pulling all the files for that new global yield fund. Jack looks like he's going to be sick." The global yield fund. The very product I'd flagged last week for inadequate risk disclosures and unrealistic return projections. My stomach tightened as I recalled the documentation issues I hadn't had time to fully investigate before my termination. My phone rang. Will's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message. "Blaine, it's Will. Look, about this morning. There's been a misunderstanding. Could you come back in for a meeting? It's important. Call me back." The desperation in his voice was unmistakable. 3 more calls from Will came over the next hour, each message more urgent than the last. I didn't return any of them. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up news about recent SEC enforcement actions. Several firms had been penalized for misleading clients about investment risks, particularly with complex products marketed to retail investors. Exactly the issue I'd raised about the global yield fund. Around noon, Tessa called. "Are you okay?" she asked when I answered. "Still processing," I admitted. "What's happening there?" "Chaos," she replied quietly. "The auditor, her name is Audrey Marshall, has taken over the small conference room. She's requesting documentation for all new products launched in the past year." "What did they tell her about me?" I asked. Tessa hesitated. Will said you were on personal leave. Jack tried to present the legal counsel as acting compliance head. But Audrey pointed out, he's not registered with the SEC in that capacity. My mind raced through the regulatory implications. The firm is required to have a designated compliance officer at all times. They can't just fire me without having a replacement ready to go. I know, Tessa said. And there's something else you should know. I was pulling your personnel file for final processing and found a memo from Jack, dated 3 weeks ago, recommending your termination. He specifically scheduled it for this week, Blaine. 3 weeks ago? I repeated. That was right after I completed my MBA. And 1 week before the SEC sent notification of this quarter's examination schedule, Tessa added meaningfully. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He knew the audit was coming. He wanted me gone before the SEC arrived. It looks that way, Tessa agreed. Listen, I shouldn't be telling you this, but they're asking for access to your email and files. Will seems particularly interested in your notes on the Global Yield Fund. After hanging up, I paced my apartment, weighing my options. If there were serious compliance violations with the fund, I could be implicated as the compliance officer who had signed off on it. Except I hadn't signed off on it. I'd raised concerns that were apparently ignored, then been terminated before the review was complete. Will called again around 3 o'clock. This time, I answered. Blaine, thank God, he said. We need you to come in. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Has there? I asked coolly. Yes, your position hasn't been eliminated. Jack overstepped. We value your expertise, especially with this routine SEC examination happening. So I'm fired in the morning but indispensable in the afternoon? Will sighed. I made a mistake listening to Jack. We need your help navigating this audit. Come back as a consultant for the week. Double your normal rate. The desperation in his voice was almost satisfying after the morning's humiliation. I don't think that would be appropriate, Will. As you said, my approach is too academic for Meridian's culture. Blaine, please. Just help us get through this audit. I'm afraid I can't do that without a formal reinstatement and acknowledgement of wrongful termination, I replied, surprising myself with my firmness. Otherwise, I'd be enabling the very compliance failures I was trying to prevent. After hanging up, I spent the evening researching SEC whistleblower protections. The regulations provided confidentiality and prohibited retaliation against employees who reported potential securities violations, but I'd already been fired. Supposedly for unrelated reasons. Would the protections still apply? And what would it mean for my career to become known as a whistleblower? My phone rang again. Devin this time. Blaine, something weird is going on, he said, his voice hushed. They've got it trying to recover files from your computer, and Jack is asking if anyone has copies of your draft memo on the Global Yield Fund. Did you tell them you have it? I'd shared my concerns with Devin last week, wanting a second set of eyes on the numbers that didn't seem to add up. No way, he said. I'm not giving them anything that might help them cover their tracks. Can we meet tomorrow? There's more you need to know. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop 10 miles from the office, far enough away to avoid running into colleagues. As I tried to sleep that night, my mind kept returning to the SEC auditor asking for the chief compliance officer, while Will's hand trembled on the organizational chart that still listed my name. The coffee shop was nearly empty when I arrived at 10 the next morning. Devin sat in a corner booth, nervously checking his phone. He looked up with relief when he saw me. Thanks for meeting me, he said as I sat down. I didn't feel comfortable discussing this over the phone. What's going on, Devin? I asked, noticing the dark circles under his eyes. He glanced around before sliding a folder across the table. These are copies of documents related to the Global Yield Fund. I've been compiling them since you first raised concerns. I opened the folder to find prospectuses, marketing materials, and internal memos about the fund that Jack had been aggressively promoting for the past 3 months. The public materials promised 12 to 15% annual returns with minimal risk, Devin explained. But look at the actual holdings. I flipped to a spreadsheet showing the fund's investments. My breath caught as I recognized what I was seeing. The fund held primarily high-risk, illiquid assets, including distressed corporate debt and unrated municipal bonds from financially troubled cities. Nothing that could reliably generate the promised returns without exceptional risk. This isn't just aggressive marketing, I said slowly. This is misrepresentation. Devin nodded grimly. And look who the primary investors are. The client list read like a who's who of Boston society. Names I recognized from charity galas and newspaper society pages. Many were connected to Patricia Pearson. Patricia brought in at least 60% of these investors through her social connections, Devin confirmed. Country club members, charity board colleagues, friends from her modeling days. Many of these people wouldn't qualify as sophisticated investors, I murmured, recognizing names of retirees and individuals with limited financial backgrounds. They wouldn't understand the true risks. There's more, Devin said, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Jack has been moving money between accounts to create the appearance of consistent returns. That's securities fraud, I said, the full implications sinking in. Has the SEC seen these? Not yet. They're focused on the official documentation so far. But they're interviewing staff tomorrow. I'm on the list. I closed the folder, my hands trembling slightly. Why are you showing me this? I don't work there anymore. Devin met my eyes. Because you're the only one who cared about doing things right. And because they're setting you up to take the fall. What do you mean? Jack told the executive team that you had reviewed and approved all the fund documentation. He's implying that any compliance issues are your failure. The betrayal stung, but didn't surprise me. I never approved the final materials. I raised specific concerns that were apparently ignored. I know. That's why I kept copies of your draft memo outlining the problems. He pulled another document from his bag. And there's something else you should see. It was a compliance approval form for the Global Yield Fund, dated yesterday, bearing what appeared to be my digital signature. That's not possible, I whispered, staring at the signature. I never signed off on this. Someone used your credentials after you left, Devin confirmed. Probably trying to create a paper trail showing you approved everything before the SEC arrived. My MBA thesis had focused on exactly this kind of compliance failure, analyzing how investment firms cut corners by misrepresenting risks to unsophisticated investors. Now I was watching it happen in real time, with my own name potentially attached to the fraud. I could be held liable for this, I realized aloud. If they convince the SEC, I approved these materials. That's why I brought these to you, Devin said. You need to protect yourself. Why are you risking your job to help me? I asked. Devin looked down at his coffee. My parents lost their retirement savings in 2008 because of firms that didn't disclose risks properly. You're one of the few people I've met in this industry who actually seems to care about protecting clients. As we parted ways, I carried copies of the documents back to my apartment, my mind racing. That evening, I called my former MBA advisor, Professor Martin, and explained the situation without naming the firm. You're in a difficult position, he acknowledged after hearing the details. If you do nothing, you could be implicated in the violations. If you come forward, you might be protected as a whistleblower, but your career in the industry could suffer. What would you do? I asked. I can't answer that for you, he said gently. But I will say that the people who can sleep at night are usually those whose actions align with their values. After our call, I searched online for information about the clients on the Global Yield Fund list. Many were retired professionals or small business owners, people who had worked hard for their money and trusted Meridian to manage it responsibly, people who couldn't afford to lose their investments to Jack's scheme. My phone rang again, Will's fifth call of the day. I let it go to voicemail. Blaine, things are getting serious here. The SEC is asking specific questions about documentation you handled. We need to coordinate our responses. Call me back immediately. The desperation in his voice was now tinged with fear. Good, I thought. surprising myself with the flash of vindictiveness. I spent the night organizing the documents Devon had provided and researching SEC reporting procedures. By morning, I had drafted a detailed timeline of events leading up to my termination, including my concerns about the global yield fund and Jack's hostile response. As I reviewed the client list one more time, a name jumped out at me that I'd missed before: Eleanor and Richard Walsh, Devon's parents. They had invested $100,000 in the global yield fund. This wasn't just about my career anymore. Real people would be hurt if Jack's scheme continued. People like Devon's parents, who had already lost their savings once to financial misconduct. My decision was made. The realization that Devon's parents had invested their money in Jack's fraudulent scheme changed everything. This wasn't an abstract regulatory issue anymore. Real people would suffer real harm if I stayed silent. Still, my hands shook as I contemplated the SEC's whistleblower hotline number on my phone. Once I made this call, there would be no going back. I would forever be labeled a whistleblower in an industry that valued loyalty and discretion. Instead of calling immediately, I reached out to a lawyer specializing in securities regulation. Samantha Reeves had been a guest speaker in one of my MBA classes, impressing me with her knowledge and integrity. "Based on what you've told me, you're looking at potential securities fraud," Samantha said after I explained the situation. "The good news is that as a former compliance officer who raised concerns before termination, you have significant whistleblower protections. The bad news is that your career will likely be impacted regardless." "How badly?" I asked. "Some firms will see you as someone with integrity. Others will see you as a risk who might call out their own questionable practices. Be prepared for both reactions." That evening, my parents called from their home in New Hampshire. They'd sensed something was wrong in our brief conversation since my firing. "I might have to report my former company to the SEC," I admitted, after explaining the situation in general terms. My father, a high school math teacher, was supportive. "You have to do what's right, honey. That's how we raised you." My mother, more practical, asked, "What about your career? Will you be able to find another job?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I'm not sure I could live with myself if people lost their savings." Because I was too afraid to speak up. After hanging up, I sat on my couch staring at the ceiling, the weight of the decision heavy on my shoulders. My phone buzzed with a text from Tessa. "SEC audit expanded. They're copying server data and requesting interviews with more staff. Will is telling everyone this is routine, but he looks terrified." Another call from Will came through, which I again sent to voicemail. His message was markedly different this time. "Blaine, I'm prepared to offer you reinstatement as Chief Compliance Officer, with a 20% salary increase and director title. We value your expertise and need your guidance during this regulatory review. Please call me back." The offer was tempting. 20% more money would help with my student loans from the MBA program. A director title would look impressive on my resume. I could go back, fix the compliance issues from the inside, protect the investors. But then Jack's voice echoed in my memory. "Your job is to keep us out of trouble, not to stop progress." I would be expected to paper over the problems, not solve them. As I considered my options, breaking news appeared on my financial news app. Harrington Investment Group collapses amid fraud allegations. Compliance officer charged. I clicked on the article to find a story painfully similar to Meridian's situation. A mid-sized investment firm had been marketing high-yield products with misrepresented risks. When it collapsed, authorities charged not only the executives who created the scheme, but also the compliance officer who had signed off on the materials. The compliance officer claimed she had raised concerns, but was overruled. Without documentation of those concerns, prosecutors argued she had failed in her duty to protect investors. Cold fear washed over me. If I did nothing, I could face not just professional repercussions but potential legal liability. My digital signature on documents I never approved could implicate me in Jack's fraud. My phone rang again. This time it was Devin. Audrey Marshall interviewed me today, he said when I answered. She asked specific questions about the global yield fund's risk disclosures and your role in approving them. What did you tell her? The truth. That you had raised concerns about the disclosures being inadequate and were still reviewing the materials when you were terminated. How did she react? She took detailed notes and asked if I had copies of any relevant documents. Devin hesitated. I didn't mention what I gave you. I thought you should decide how to handle that. Thank you, I said sincerely. Any fallout for you? Jack cornered me afterward, asking what I told the SEC. He implied my future at the firm depends on being a team player during this audit. Be careful, Devin. Document everything Jack says to you. After we hung up, I stared at the SEC hotline number again. My career, my reputation, potentially even my legal standing hung in the balance. But so did the savings of dozens of investors who trusted Meridian with their financial futures. I was drafting an email to the SEC when my doorbell rang. To my shock, Patricia Pearson stood in my hallway, looking nothing like the confident socialite who had interrupted my training session. Her designer clothes were replaced by jeans and a simple sweater, her perfect makeup absent. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. Curiosity overcame my resentment. I stepped aside to let her enter. "I owe you an apology," she said once we were seated in my living room. "I didn't understand what was happening at Meridian." "What changed?" I asked warily. "The SEC investigator interviewed me today. She asked about my role in bringing clients to the Global Yield Fund." Patricia looked down at her hands. Then she showed me the actual holdings of the fund compared to what Jack told me was in it. "You didn't know?" Patricia shook her head. "Jack told me it was a conservative fund suitable for retirees." I believed him. I brought in friends. Family. Her voice broke. My parents put their entire retirement account into it. $3 million they spent 40 years saving. The revelation stunned me. Patricia wasn't a knowing participant in the scheme. She was another victim. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because the investigator mentioned your name. She said you had raised concerns about the fund before being terminated." Patricia met my eyes directly. "I think Jack got rid of you because you were going to expose what he was doing. And I helped him do it." Her admission hung in the air between us. "What will you do now?" I asked finally. "Tell the truth to the SEC." She replied without hesitation. "My parents and friends trusted me. I won't protect Jack after this." She stood to leave, then turned back. "If you're considering speaking to the investigators, I wanted you to know you won't be alone." After she left, I sat in silence for several minutes, processing this unexpected development. Patricia's visit had crystallized what I already knew I had to do. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Audrey Marshall, SEC investigator. The SEC's Boston office occupied several floors of a downtown high-rise. I arrived for my 10 a.m. appointment with Audrey Marshall, with a leather portfolio containing all the documentation Devin had provided, plus my own notes and timeline. The receptionist directed me to a conference room, where Audrey waited. She was perhaps 50, with shrewd eyes behind practical glasses, and a no-nonsense demeanor that seemed to cut through pretense. "Miss Carter," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "Thank you for coming in." "Thank you for meeting me," I replied, taking the seat she indicated. "Before we begin, I should clarify that this is an informal discussion, not a formal deposition," Audrey explained. "However, anything you share may be used in our investigation." I nodded my understanding. "Now, you were terminated from your position as Chief Compliance Officer at Meridian Capital 2 days ago, correct?" "Yes. Though according to my former colleagues, the firm represented to you that I was on personal leave." Audrey's expression revealed nothing. But she made a note. "And you believe your termination was related to concerns you raised about certain investment products?" "Specifically, the Global Yield Fund," I confirmed. I had identified issues with risk disclosures and questioned whether the projected returns were realistic given the underlying assets. And did you document these concerns? Yes. I opened my portfolio and removed the draft memo I had prepared, dated 1 week before my termination. This outlines the specific issues I identified and recommendations for addressing them. Audrey reviewed the document carefully. This was never finalized or distributed. I shared it with select colleagues for input, including Devin Walsh. Before I could finalize it, I was terminated. Yet we found a compliance approval form with your signature, dated after your termination. I pulled out the document Devin had provided. This signature was applied without my knowledge or consent. I never approved these materials. Audrey studied the document with increased interest. Do you have any other relevant information about the Global Yield Fund or other Meridian products? Over the next 2 hours, I walked Audrey through everything I knew about the fund's structure, marketing, and investor base. I explained Jack's pressure to expedite compliance approvals and Will's gradual shift from supporting thorough reviews to pushing for faster turnaround. And you believe your MBA completion triggered your termination? Audrey asked. I believe it was a factor, I replied. After completing my thesis on predatory investment practices, I became more vocal about potential issues with the Global Yield Fund. According to my HR contact, Jack recommended my termination 3 weeks ago, shortly after my graduation. Audrey made extensive notes before looking up at me. Ms. Carter, I appreciate your cooperation. We'll need to corroborate your account with other evidence and testimony. In the meantime, I advise you not to discuss this matter with current Meridian employees. As I prepared to leave, Audrey added, the SEC takes whistleblower protections seriously. If you experience retaliation related to this disclosure, please contact me immediately. Outside the SEC office, I felt both lighter and more uncertain. I had done what I believed was right, but my professional future remained a question mark. That uncertainty crystallized the next morning when my phone rang with an unknown number. Blaine Carter? A male voice asked when I answered. Yes, this is Blaine. This is Arthur Jenkins from Littleton and Meyer. I represent Meridian Capital. I'm calling to inform you that your actions may constitute breach of confidentiality under your employment agreement. My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. I've broken no confidentiality agreements. If Meridian has concerns, they should direct them to my attorney, Samantha Reeves. Ms. Carter, let me be clear. Sharing internal documents with regulators without prior authorization could expose you to significant liability. Mr. Jenkins, let me be equally clear. Whistleblower protections under federal securities laws supersede any confidentiality agreements. I've consulted with legal counsel on this matter. After hanging up, I immediately called Samantha, who confirmed my understanding and agreed to handle any further communications from Meridian's lawyers. Later that afternoon, Will called again. Against my better judgment, I answered. Blaine, we need to talk, he said, his voice strained. The SEC is expanding their investigation based on information they received. I think we both know where it came from. I've done nothing wrong, Will. You could have come to me with your concerns. We could have handled this internally. I did come to you. You fired me the next day. Will's tone changed, becoming almost pleading. It's not too late to fix this. Come back as CCO, with a director title and 30% raise. Help us address any issues with the fund documentation. We can make this right without destroying the firm. The offer was even more generous than before, and for a moment I wavered. Then I remembered the forged signature on the compliance approval. Someone used my credentials to falsify documents after I left, Will. That's fraud. Silence stretched for several seconds. Jack made some mistakes, Will finally admitted. But we can correct them. The investors don't have to lose money. We can restructure the fund, improve the disclosures. It's too late for that. The SEC has the documentation. Will's voice hardened. You realize this will destroy careers, including yours? No firm will hire a whistleblower. I'll take that chance rather than be complicit in fraud. After hanging up, I sat on my couch, feeling the weight of Will's warning. He wasn't entirely wrong. Many firms would be reluctant to hire someone known for reporting their previous employer. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Parking garage. Level 3. Your car. Now. Alarmed but curious, I grabbed my pepper spray and headed down to the garage beneath my apartment building. As I approached my car, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Patricia. Sorry for the cryptic message, she said. I didn't want to risk Jack seeing my text to you. What's going on? The SEC interviewed Jack today, Patricia explained. He came home furious, saying you had given them some kind of memo. He was on the phone with lawyers for hours. Is he threatening legal action against me? Patricia nodded. But that's not why I'm here. After he finally fell asleep, I checked his email. She handed me a flash drive. This contains communications between Jack and Will about the fund. They knew the returns were impossible to achieve legitimately. They discussed ways to make it look like you had approved everything. I stared at the small device. Why are you giving me this? Patricia's composed facade cracked slightly. Because my parents trusted me with their retirement. Because I brought in friends who can't afford to lose their investments. And because what they did to you was wrong. This could implicate Will directly, I noted. I know. He deserves it. He knew what Jack was doing and let it happen. As Patricia turned to leave, she paused. For what it's worth, I truly am sorry about my role in your termination. I was trying to protect Jack because I thought he was protecting our clients. The next day, I provided the flash drive to Audrey Marshall. She reviewed the contents with increasing interest. This is significant evidence of intent, she said. Combined with your testimony and the documentation you provided earlier, we have grounds to advance our investigation substantially. Within 48 hours, the SEC announced a formal enforcement investigation into Meridian Capital's sales practices and disclosures. Trading of Meridian's publicly traded parent company was temporarily suspended, and news outlets began reporting on the probe. A reporter from the Wall Street Journal called me for comment, which I declined on Samantha's advice. The story ran anyway, identifying me as a former compliance officer who had raised concerns before being terminated. My phone filled with messages from former colleagues. Most expressed support, though a few accused me of betraying the company for personal gain. Devin sent a simple text. You did the right thing. Tessa called to tell me the SEC had stationed investigators at Meridian's offices, reviewing documents and interviewing staff. Jack hasn't been in for 2 days. She added. Rumor is, he's negotiating with the SEC through his attorneys. I spent the next week in limbo, sending out job applications with little expectation of response. As Will had predicted, being associated with an SEC investigation, even as a whistleblower, made me toxic to potential employers. Then the story broke wide open. The Boston Globe published an investigative piece titled, Meridian's Mirage: How a Boston Investment Firm Misled Dozens of Investors. The article detailed Jack's scheme and named me as the compliance officer who had tried to stop it before being terminated. The next morning, my phone rang with another unknown number. Blaine Carter? This is Eleanor Walsh, Devin's mother. My heart sank, anticipating blame for potentially losing her investment. I wanted to thank you, she continued, surprising me. The SEC called us yesterday about our investment in the Global Yield Fund. They're working to freeze assets and potentially recover investor funds before more damage is done. I'm so sorry about your investment, I said sincerely. Don't be. Better to know now than after everything is gone. After 2008, we learned that losing some money is better than losing all of it. Eleanor's call was the first of many. As news of the investigation spread, investors began reaching out to thank me for coming forward. One elderly couple sent flowers to my apartment with a note that read simply, Our retirement thanks you. None of this helped my job prospects, however. 2 promising interviews were canceled after the companies discovered my connection to the Meridian investigation. Then, 3 weeks after my initial meeting with Audrey Marshall, I received a call from James Forrester, CEO of Northeastern Financial, one of Boston's most respected investment firms. "Miss Carter, I've been following the Meridian situation with interest," he said. "Our firm is looking to strengthen our compliance department, and we value professionals with both expertise and integrity. Would you be interested in coming in to discuss opportunities with us?" For the first time since my termination, I felt a glimmer of hope for my professional future. 6 weeks after my meeting with Audrey Marshall, the SEC announced formal charges against Meridian Capital, Jack Pearson, and Will Grant. The complaint detailed how they had misrepresented investment risks, falsified compliance approvals, and used new investor money to create the appearance of returns for existing clients. A classic Ponzi scheme structure. The SEC secured an emergency asset freeze to protect remaining investor funds and appointed a receiver to manage Meridian's assets. Jack and Will both faced securities fraud charges carrying potential prison sentences. I watched the news coverage from my new office at Northeastern Financial, where I had been hired as Director of Compliance. James Forrester had seen my whistleblowing not as a liability but as evidence of the integrity he wanted in his compliance department. "We need someone who will stand up to pressure," he had explained during my interview. "Someone who puts investor protection above office politics." My phone buzzed with a text from Devin. "Have you seen the news? Justice is being served." Devin had landed on his feet too, accepting a position at Northeastern after I recommended him to James. His analytical skills and ethical backbone made him a perfect addition to our growing compliance team. Tessa had moved on as well, joining a tech startup as their HR director. "After watching what happened at Meridian, I needed a company with values I could believe in," she told me over lunch. The most surprising development came from Patricia. After filing for divorce from Jack, she had channeled her social connections into founding an investor education nonprofit, focusing on helping people understand financial risks and recognize warning signs of fraud. "I never want anyone else to unknowingly bring friends and family into a fraudulent investment," she explained when we met for coffee. "Including myself." Her parents' funds, along with those of other investors, were partially recovered through the asset freeze, though the legal process would likely take years to fully resolve. 3 months after the charges were announced, I received an unexpected email from my MBA program. Professor Martin had nominated me for the school's annual Ethics in Business Award, citing my actions at Meridian as exemplifying the principles taught in the program. "Your thesis on preventing predatory investment practices wasn't just academic research," he wrote. "You lived those principles when it mattered most." The award ceremony coincided with the 1-year anniversary of completing my MBA, bringing my journey full circle. Standing at the podium accepting recognition from the school that had inadvertently contributed to my firing felt surreal. "Education should never be seen as a threat to ethical business practices," I said in my acceptance speech. "Knowledge and integrity should go hand in hand, reinforcing rather than opposing each other." In the audience sat my parents, beaming with pride, alongside James, Devin, Tessa, and to my surprise, Patricia. Also present were several former Meridian clients, including Eleanor and Richard Walsh, who had become vocal advocates for stronger investor protections. After the ceremony, James approached with news. Northeastern was creating a formal compliance training program for all employees, and he wanted me to lead it. "Your evening business program wasn't unprofessional," he said, deliberately echoing Patricia's words from that fateful night. It was exactly what the industry needs more of. 1 year to the day after my termination from Meridian, I stood before a room of Northeastern employees, conducting my first official compliance training session. The irony wasn't lost on me as I explained the importance of accurate risk disclosures and client suitability assessments. This time, there were no interruptions, no accusations of overstepping. Instead, James had made the training mandatory for all client-facing staff, with executives attending to demonstrate its importance. That evening, I checked my email to find a notification from the SEC. The final settlement had been approved in the Meridian case. Will had accepted a lifetime ban from the securities industry and a substantial financial penalty. Jack had received similar sanctions, plus a referral for criminal prosecution. Most importantly for the investors, the settlement included nearly 70% recovery of their principal investments, far more than typically seen in such cases. The swift action resulting from my whistleblowing had preserved significant assets that might otherwise have disappeared. As I closed my laptop, I reflected on the journey of the past year. My MBA hadn't cost me my job in the end. It had given me the knowledge and confidence to recognize wrongdoing and take a stand against it. What had seemed like professional catastrophe had ultimately led to a better position, working for a company that valued rather than feared ethical compliance. The lessons were clear. Technical knowledge matters, but integrity matters more. Standing alone is difficult, but sometimes necessary. And in the financial industry, where trust is the ultimate currency, doing the right thing isn't just morally correct, it's good business. My phone buzzed with a text from Devin. Dinner to celebrate the settlement? Eleanor and Richard want to thank you properly. I smiled and replied affirmatively. From fired compliance officer to award-winning whistleblower to respected director, my path had been unpredictable but ultimately rewarding. The SEC truly had had the last laugh, and surprisingly, so had I. Have you ever faced a situation where standing up for what's right seemed like it might cost you everything? I'd love to hear your stories and thoughts in the comments below. Remember that integrity might be tested in difficult moments, but it's what defines us in the long run. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more content about professional courage and ethics. And if you know someone facing difficult ethical choices in their career, share this story to let them know they're not alone. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most rewarding outcomes.